Okay, so Future of Foods is very lucky to have with us today the founder of Good Food Institute, Bruce Friedrich, to help kick off 2026 with a blast. GFI is at the forefront of boosting plant-based and cultivated meats into effective production and mainstream acceptance. Bruce has become a significant voice as a result in the protein shift. And he's recently written a book, Meat, which addresses many of the misconceptions about protein transition and looks at problems and solutions and how we can produce meat differently and better. So, welcome to the program, Bruce.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm delighted to be here. I love your show.
Thank you. Your book, Meat, positions the shift to alternative proteins as a new agricultural revolution. So, what are the core ideas you wanted to put on the table for readers? And also, who are those readers that you really want to reach with the book?
So the core idea is that global meat consumption has been going up since forever and is expected to continue to go up for as long as anybody is forecasting. So the UN Food and Agriculture Organization started tracking global meat consumption in 1961. And if you include meat and seafood, meat consumption has been going up literally every single year, a new global record since 1961. And that is predicted to continue through at least 2050. There were three little blips where land animal meat went down a teeny bit, one for mad cow disease, one for African swine fever, and one for COVID. But if you look even at the land animal meat trajectory, it's as though those blips didn't happen. And if you include seafood, those blips go away entirely because those three events did not cut seafood consumption at all. Seafood consumption also every single year, a new global record. And that has significant adverse implications for hunger and malnutrition, for climate change, biodiversity, and a range of environmental harms, as well as for antimicrobial resistance and pandemic risk. So in the first four chapters of the book, I dive into those issues, hunger and malnutrition, environmental issues, antimicrobial resistance, and pandemic risk. In chapter five, I talk about, so if you grant that there are these external costs that are associated with meat consumption, what's the solution? What are people who care about these things trying to do to decrease that trajectory? And it really just boils down to one fundamental thing, and that is try to convince people to eat less meat. The global health, environmental, and animal welfare advocates who have been trying to do that for at least 50 years have been wildly successful in getting attention to the health and environmental and animal welfare consequences of meat consumption. But what hasn't happened is global meat consumption has not gone down. And that's really been the one thing that people have been trying to do, and it's not working. And I compare meat consumption to energy consumption or personal vehicle use. We want the range of interventions to decrease fossil fuel consumption. We want the range of interventions to decrease the adverse impact environmentally of personal transportation. So we want more energy efficient, everything from light bulbs to buildings. We want bike lanes, we want great public transit, et cetera. But at the end of the day, the world's going to consume more energy. The world is going to buy more cars and drive more miles. So our best solution to the adverse consequences of those consumption patterns is renewable energy and electric vehicles. And I make the case that the same thing is true here. Plant-based meat and cultivated meat can literally eliminate meat's contribution to antimicrobial resistance and pandemic risk, and it can slash meat's contribution to hunger, malnutrition, deforestation, climate change, etc. Um, then I talk about why I'm optimistic for the success of plant-based meat and cultivated meat. Um, I talk about dubiousness on the basis of flagging plant-based meat sales and a chilling cultivated meat investor environment, and talk about other um, innovations and the degree to which those innovations took time to catch on. I talk about the economic benefits of plant-based meat and cultivated meat, that it is a $2 trillion market right now, and that the first principles of plant-based meat and cultivated meat mean that that entire $2 trillion market is up for grabs. Um, Probably the two most important chapters in the book are chapter 9 and chapter 10. Chapter 9 is the economics, and chapter 10 is food security and food systems resilience. The reason governments are investing in plant-based meat and cultivated meat is the economic opportunity of these technologies, as well as the food security and food systems resilience benefits of these technologies. And as with electric vehicles, renewable energy, and really all technological innovation, it's been a partnership of governments, scientists, and industry. We need all three of those things here. And that's where the economic benefits, the GDP benefits, the jobs benefits, and the food security benefits become so critically important to convincing, for example, Singapore, Israel, Japan, Korea, as well as the US, China, and other countries to invest in these technologies. So that's basically the book in a nutshell.
Okay.
Sorry for the long-winded response.
No, that's all right. I mean, the other question was who are your readers for this book? Who are you expecting to read it? Are you expecting the general public to pick this book up?
Well, I've gotten very positive response from early readers and endorsers who are in the general public. So my publisher made the book available on NetGalley for early readers, and all of this response has been very positive. And then some of my early endorsers have talked about um, the idea that the storytelling is engaging. A couple of people have said that I'm funny in the presentation, but really, I mean, at the end of the day, um, the people who the book is kind of for um, is scientists and policymakers and people in industry who can lean in and be a part of making the alternative proteins endeavor successful. But I've been really gratified by the degree to which um, folks like George Church, the father of synthetic biology, um, and Michael Kremer, Nobel laureate in economics for his work in global development, and others have flagged the book as engaging, interesting, funny, etc. Two different people in their endorsements said it's a book for anybody who eats. So my hope is, the vast majority of people eat meat. Um, and hopefully I will keep people's attention sufficiently that anybody who
Yeah.
cares about food and the future of food will find it engaging. I hope.
Yes. Well, I mean, I'd say I've got through about half of it, and I enjoyed it, uh, and I found it very illuminating. And but I was kind of I was asking about the readership because I mean, do you consider that this industry is still too early for the general public to really pay an interest in it? Is there a way to go yet to bring these people on board, to bring, you know, everybody else along?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I talk about that I dive into in chapter 5 is the degree to which most members of the general public, just most people in general, are not willing to pay more um, for food in the same way that most people are not going to pay more for an electric vehicle unless it brings other benefits. Most people are not going to pay more for plant-based or cultivated meat unless it brings other benefits. Um, and so I think for most people, buying plant-based meat and cultivated meat is probably not going to be a short-term thing until the products compete on price and taste. But there are lots of early adopters. I mean, everybody who self-identifies as a foodie, and there are a lot of people who self-identify as foodies. Cultivated meat is now available in restaurants around the United States. It's going to be available in more and more in 2026. It's available in Singapore, in Australia, a growing number of countries. Um, and it's expensive, but a lot of people are happy to shell out a little bit more for a novel experience like that. And then plant-based meat, the best plant-based meats, there are half a dozen now that most meat consumers like as much as the animal meat that they're replacing. And all of them have less fat, less saturated fat, significantly more protein as a percentage of calories, far less likelihood of any kind of bacterial or other contamination, et cetera. Um, so the people who are interested in the environmental benefits, the animal welfare benefits, the health benefits, and are willing to pay a little bit more for those advantages, there are products available for those folks now. And I chat about that in the book.
Okay, so it is a very optimistic book. I wonder, I mean, over this last year, 2025, how has it compared to previous years in regard to um, the kind of buoyancy of the product, and do you think it's looking positive now, I suppose is the question.
Yeah, it's interesting. So at the end of 2025, I guess it was actually September, I think. UC Davis, iCamp, which is their alternative protein endeavor. Um, I was at a conference and I was chatting with the people who are running the alternative protein endeavor at UC Davis, as well as with some venture capitalists. And David Block, Professor David Block, who's the head of the UC Davis endeavor, said it's impossible not to be optimistic because there's so much more science, there's so much more government funding, there are so many more people from industry, from academe, policymakers, significant progress every single year in terms of regulatory support. Lots more people who are concerned about food systems and national security who are enthusiastic about the alternative meats endeavor. And I think that's captured by the range of people who provided endorsements for my book and the fact that the foreword to the book was written by Caitlin Welsh, who spent 10 years in the Obama and first Trump administrations at the Department of State and the National Security Council working on global food and water security. And now she's director of global food and water security for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the top think tanks in the world. And we've got the World Bank, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, the United Nations Environment Program, so many more institutions recognizing the importance of alternative proteins, so many more scientists, so much more government support. So David was like, it's impossible not to be excited and optimistic.
Yeah.
And then the folks who represented venture capital were like, we can do it. We can play naysayer. Um, so I would say most things are moving in the right direction. But sales for plant-based meat and investment in cultivated meat um, is certainly flagging. And the main thing I would say about that is in the first 10 years, from 1900 to 1910, the automobile industry saw 500 companies fail. In 1908, Henry Ford releases the Model T. And over the next couple decades, he brings the cost down and down and down as they manufactured more. Um, and automobiles went from being what Woodrow Wilson, who in 1906 he was president of Princeton University, and said they will never be anything more than a plaything for the idle rich.
Mm.
Um, and there are similar examples. In 1984, the CEO of Apple said home computers are never going to be useful in the home for anything other than glorified bookkeeping. Um, when the dot-com bubble burst, Amazon's stock price fell by 95%, from I think $213 to less than $6 a share. Um, Pets.com went out of business, and the media obituaries were ruthless. When is this Jeff Bezos guy ever going to turn a profit? Of
Mm.
course, his company wasn't worth all that money. Of course, nobody wants to buy pet supplies online. Are you kidding me? Pets.com? What a sham. Um, and obviously, computers are doing well, cars are doing well, the internet's doing well. And in all three cases, it happened really fast. Like immediately after kind of the consensus view was what a farce, these technologies took off
Mm.
because the products improved, the prices came down, and they met consumers. So most, if not all, technologies had sort of early struggles, early smoke, and then they took off.
Yeah.
So I talk about that a lot. I mean, that's basically the focus of chapter 8, um, is that, and then chapter 11, I talk about first principles, and really dive into the science of plant-based and cultivated meat. Spoke with literally all of the top scientists on both the plant-based meat side and the cultivated meat side. Okay, I shouldn't say I spoke with all of them, but I spoke with a lot of them about their current reflection 10 years in, and the degree to which they are or are not enthusiastic about this endeavor. Um, and everybody just gets more enthusiastic year by year by year. So the investor smoke, the tough consumer market is kind of par for the course, but the products will improve, the prices will come down. And the fact that we are seeing more and more government support and more scientific interest gives me a lot of optimism. I do try in the book to make it clear-eyed optimism. I do say multiple times, this could still fail. There are a lot of technologies that were unnecessarily delayed for quite a lot of time because the science and government communities basically didn't get behind them as early as they could have and should have. Penicillin is probably the quintessential example of that. Um, and there are lots of technologies. Derek Thompson and Ezra Klein in their book Abundance, they say there's like many, many technologies and other advancements that are waiting to be discovered. Um, these things are not self-executing. But I will say I'm optimistic about the prospects for these technologies. And then in the book, the sort of challenge to the policy science and industry communities is let's get behind it and make it happen. And let's do that as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's kind of based on the ethos that you can't stop progress, perhaps, but also there needs to be a tipping point, like lots of these examples you mentioned, and 2025 saw a few companies, uh, sort of pull out of the sector because they weren't getting enough investment. But you say that the governments are behind it. Is that the American governments, or is that kind of governments in general?
Every government that puts significant amounts of money into biotechnology, life sciences, or agriculture, 7 years ago, none of them were investing. Now, all of them are investing. So that means Singapore and Israel kind of leading the way, but also Japan, Korea. Actually, China is probably leading the way at this point. They've lapped the sort of early adopters were Singapore and Israel, and that was for pure food security reasons. They import the vast majority of their food, so they're technologically very advanced, but in a very precarious situation in terms of food self-sufficiency. All governments are interested in maximizing the amount of food that they produce in country. And so if you do some Googling of, well, I mean, this is chapter 10 of the book, focuses on the food self-sufficiency numbers around these sort of technologically advanced but small countries. And then really dives in on China, which when it entered the WTO in the year 2000, well, maybe 2002, 2003, was food self-sufficient and has been going in the opposite direction. As they become more economically developed, their meat consumption has skyrocketed. With that has come massive imports of feed crops, as well as, they're far and away the world's number one feed crop importer and the world's number one meat importer across all of the meats, even though they also produce a lot in country. And what that means is their food self-sufficiency numbers are going in the wrong direction. And President Xi recognizes this and has talked about moving toward food self-sufficiency on the wings of food innovation. That was that's what he said. And China is leaning in on plant-based and cultivated meat for these reasons. The US is also leaning in, and it's bipartisan. It's Republicans and Democrats. And this goes back to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is a bipartisan think tank, oftentimes flagged as the top national security think tank in the world. And they did I think it was about a 4,500 word report on alternative proteins, and they really leaned in on food and water security, food systems resilience, and just the fragility of the current food supply chain. If you have to grow, it takes 9 calories of feed to get 1 calorie from a chicken. It takes 40 calories of feed to get 1 calorie from a cow. That inefficiency means you have to grow all of those crops, ship the crops, operate a feed mill, shipping the crops to the feed mill, operating the feed mill, shipping the feed to the farm, operating the farm, shipping the animals to the slaughterhouse, operating the slaughterhouse. All of those extra stages of production add precarity and fragility to our food system supply chain. That if you can condense that and basically grow the crops and turn them into plant-based meat, or grow the crops and use them to feed, basically cultivated meat is just like you can take a seed or a cutting from a plant, bathe that seed or cutting in nutrients and grow a whole plant. You can do the same thing with a small amount of animal muscle or animal fat. And it still takes nutrients to cause the meat to grow, but it condenses the supply chain and makes it much less fragile, much less precarious, and much less vulnerable to agroterrorism, which is something that the George W. Bush administration was super concerned about. And then the Biden administration got super concerned about again. And addressing these concerns is really not a left-right issue. These kinds of concerns, the economic benefits, the jobs benefits, consumer choice, these sorts of things, innovation, small business, these are all bipartisan concerns. As is, the other thing that the Center for Strategic and International Studies leans in on their report was, do we want China to control global food? Do we want them to control the meat supply in the same way they produce something like 70% of solar panels, They now have BYD, the largest EV company in the world, and are producing, I think, even north of 70% of EV batteries. Even if you don't care about EVs and even if you're not concerned about climate change, the fact that China 15 years ago had $0 in revenue from EV batteries and EVs, and now has $600 billion in revenue, from zero to $650 billion in 15 years. Similar numbers, if you're looking at the year 2000 and the year 2025 with regard to solar production. These are industries that could have been US dominated, and they aren't. And Republicans and Democrats want to learn from those examples, figure out what the next big industries are, and lean in. So right now, the US has the top innovators, the top private sector, the top scientists across plant-based and cultivated meat. But that was once true of solar and EVs as well. It could change.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose also, there are clearly many reasons why this science makes sense, and why plant-based foods make sense. But there is also a a matter of perception, isn't there? I mean, there is the general public, perhaps the ones I speak to when I mention this science, or when I kind of mention plant-based, usually there's a bit of a yuck factor, and people think that, I guess there's a perception that farming is like it's still how it used to be, perhaps that all the cows are out in the fields and having a jolly good time, and then they kind of, then it's all very sweet in a kind of children's book style food production, and that the alternative is factory production. Um, and I think this perception is putting people off. I mean, how do you feel about that?
I don't know, Alex. I mean, I know that what you just said um, is a common question and a common perception. Um, but all of the consumer polling that has been done has caused me to be really quite bullish about consumers and both plant-based and cultivated meat. So when there was like the early super enthusiasm for plant-based meat in sort of the early days of the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger, there were a lot of consumer polls, and all of them indicated that something like, 40 to 70% of consumers were enthusiastic about cost and taste competitive plant-based meat. The numbers are pretty similar with regard to cultivated meat, and that's why you saw all of the major analysts, banks, and others, and the consultancies like McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, Barclays, um, and other analysts be super bullish about the prospects for these technologies. And the thing that they missed, the reason that plant-based meat and cultivated meat didn't take off to the degree that you might have expected on the basis of those analyses, is that the plant-based meats didn't taste good enough and they cost too much. And cultivated meat similarly um, has not, they're not producing it at the volumes that some people expected and the price points that some people expected. And it was the common sense that seems to be true across so many technologies that there's too much optimism for like immediately and not enough optimism for over time. And so the products do need to compete on price and taste. And that was harder, I think, than the early analysts predicted. But if you look at the underlying consumer polling on this, consumer numbers are super strong. And the really interesting thing about that is if you look at any of these polls, literally all of them, that ask the follow-up question to the people who say they're not enthused. So there's a poll, I think it was out of Purdue, and it found that 70% of people, 70% of the consumers they polled were enthusiastic about trying cultivated meat. And then you ask the 30% who are not. The question was, if lab grown meat, so they even use the word lab grown. The question was if lab grown meat tasted the same and cost the same, would you be enthusiastic about eating it? And something like 70% of people said yes. And then the 30% who said no, they said, why not? And the top two reasons were, I think it's not going to taste very good, and I think it's going to be too expensive. So they literally denied the premise of the question. That's
Mm.
even more true on plant-based meat. People have had veggie burgers, they've had veggie dogs, they've had veggie nuggets, and they hated them. They sucked.
Mm.
Um, for the first decades of these plant-based meats, they really were supposed to be for vegetarians and meat reducers. It wasn't until Pat Brown founded Beyond and Ethan Brown founded Beyond and Pat Brown founded Impossible that the idea that we could have plant-based burgers that were indistinguishable and less expensive, that's a very new concept for people. And so almost everybody who says no to the plant-based burgers at price and taste parity, when followed up with, says, I think they're going to suck and I think they're going to be too expensive. Because right now, from the perspective of meat eaters, they're not delicious enough and they're not affordable enough. And human beings just have a really hard time imagining a future state that's different from the current state. So, and I dive into this in the book. I talk about plant-based meat in chapter 7 and cultivated meat in chapter 6. And I look at the consumer polls and I pick them apart. And I say, my hypothesis is that not only are the polls really good just on their face, even when you call it lab-grown meat or in vitro meat, um, but if you look at the underlying sort of conversations, what you find is that the polls, which start off really good, are underselling consumer enthusiasm for these technologies. Um, and as with most new technologies, what probably happens is you've got the early adopters, they're very enthusiastic, they're eating the plant-based meat, they're eating the cultivated meat, and then even the naysayers are going to stop wanting to pay more for products that are more likely to have salmonella, campylobacter, the more than 100 drugs that USDA allows to be contaminating meat as long as the levels are low enough. If it's seafood, the mercury contamination, the dioxin contamination. I don't think lots of consumers are going to want to pay more for all of the bad stuff in meat if they can pay less for meat that doesn't have that bad stuff.
Mm. Especially because in America it's the same as Europe with the cost of living crisis, and I expect this will also have some kind of steering factor on people's choices in the future. If the price can be brought down and the taste, like you say, can be as good at least. But perhaps, I mean, there is a school of thought thinking that cultivated meat, for example, should be better than meat in order to kind of drive change. Why make it the same? Why not make it better than the real meat?
Yeah, I mean that's a view of both the plant-based meat side and the cultivated meat side.
Mm.
So I mean, Pat Brown, the founder of Impossible Foods, is very fond of pointing out that the fact that we domesticated chickens, pigs, turkeys, cattle was not because those are the tastiest animals to eat. It's because those were the easiest animals to domesticate. So you are working with the current meats, you've definitely got a ceiling of what's possible in terms of deliciousness. Whereas with both plant-based meat and cultivated meat, we can get to equal and keep going. So yeah, I mean that's absolutely true, and is certainly a part of the vision for most people who are working in this space. in the same way that EVs are becoming better than gas-powered cars, um, alternative meats can become even better than the products they're replacing.
Yeah. So you were at COP30 in 2025. I wanted to just ask you a little bit about your experiences there. So, I mean, how did you find the reception between kind of national delegates at COP30 to food system recommendations? I mean, was there resistance? I know it's only really since 2023 that food has been on the agenda at COP30.
Yeah, I mean, really, really, it's COP28 in 2023. You're right. The UAE was the first to put food meaningfully onto the agenda. And it's really sort of backslid in 2024 and 2025. And if you have, 27 years of focusing almost exclusively on energy transition, um, prying openness to thinking about food systems um, is, I suppose, going to be predictably challenging. Although, I mean, this is chapter 2 of the book, where I point out that there is a global consensus that if meat consumption continues to go up, um, all of the current livestock interventions to mitigate the emissions from livestock, you put them all together, you maximize the likelihood of success, and you're looking at about 800 million, 800 megatons of mitigation. That's the possibility. The problem is that that is swamped by the increase in number of animals, which is going to bring you about 2 billion um, metric tons of additional emissions. So your best case scenario is still a lot more carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, even if all of the interventions that try to mitigate the emissions from meat production were maximally successful, which is already pretty unlikely. So the scientific consensus is if meat consumption keeps going up, climate goals are completely impossible. The World Resources Institute says that in 2050, on our current trajectory, we're going to have about 15 gigatons of emissions from food. And to meet climate targets, we need to have a maximum of 4 gigatons from food. There's no scenario in which that happens unless meat consumption goes down. And literally, the only two things anybody's talking about for meat consumption to go down is convince people to eat less meat, which is the strategy of the last 50 years. And it's a valuable strategy. It's important, just like driving less and consuming less are important for vehicle emissions and fossil fuel emissions. But it's not enough. Alternative proteins are going to be absolutely required to meet climate goals. And so it's disheartening the degree to which the policy climate community writ large um, is mostly ignoring food. And even if they're looking at food, they're not looking, for the most part, at these levers that can have the maximum possible mitigation and sequestration benefits, which is to say, alternative proteins. That is beginning to change. The UN Environment Program released a significant report with like 35 experts. It's called What's Cooking? And I mean, it's just an enthusiastic endorsement of alternative proteins for global health, for AMR and pandanus risk, as well as for the range of environmental benefits, including deforestation benefits and climate benefits and biodiversity benefits. The International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis, similarly, incredibly strong report on these issues. Climate Works Foundation and the Global Methane Hub sponsored some great work that McKinsey economists did along these lines. And I dive into all of this in the book, but it's still the case that the vast majority of conversations about climate mitigation and the vast majority of the work is focused exclusively on energy transition.
Mm.
And there is a 0% chance that we meet climate targets if all we're focused on is energy transition. So a big part of what I'm trying to do with the book is shake the climate community awake on this issue and get alternative proteins into the conversation as absolutely essential. I mean, one of the remarkable things I discovered in the book when I crunched the numbers is that all of the analyses that have been done so far of alternative proteins and their capacity to lessen emissions indicate that at about 12% adoption of alternative proteins, you've got the mitigation benefits of a 100% global shift. Every passenger car, bus, and light truck on the planet shifts to EVs. Alternative proteins at about 12% has that same climate benefit. And that's before you factor in the massive land use benefits. Of course, shifting to EVs has no land use benefits. The deforestation benefits, and it also comes with a bunch of other benefits that EVs do not have in terms of antimicrobial resistance, in terms of pandemic risk, in terms of water pollution. EVs have the air pollution benefits. Alternative proteins have those benefits as well.
Okay, so are you hopeful that future COP meetings will be more productive in regards to kind of food systems change?
I mean, it's moving in the right direction. We're only 3 years in. I mean, writ large, it's moving in the right direction. COP28 in Dubai was certainly the best. COP29 and 30 have not been as food systems oriented as COP28. But yes, we're seeing more and more conversation, and that feels encouraging. And then I think, really, if you think about how long has the global climate community been thinking about alternative proteins at all? 2021 was the first third-party validation. 2023 saw a few more. And literally a month ago, the UN Environment Program released the report GEO-7, GEO-7, which is the largest and deepest analysis of climate change that has ever been done. And it is unequivocally positive on the benefits and importance of alternative proteins. So far, that hasn't, nobody's really noticed, but that's certainly something that we and others who are working in this space will make sure that the diplomats from governments, as well as the broader climate community, notices that and takes it seriously. So I think it's like 1,000-page report, and alternative proteins are obviously a very small part of it. But the alternative protein analysis is unequivocally positive. So enthusiastic about that.
Okay. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the GFI because obviously that's a big part of your life. So clearly, so there's big investments behind the GFI into sort of setting it up. How difficult was it to found something quite so significant? Because I mean now it's over how many countries is it in? 8 countries, I think. Um,
Probably in more than 8 countries. We've got kind of 6 GFIs. So we have India, Israel, Brazil, the US, and then Asia Pacific, which is Singapore, China, and Japan. And then in Europe, we're kind of all over Europe, but we're doing a lot of focused work in the UK, in Germany, and then in Brussels at the European Commission level. Um, Although we're also obviously operational in a bunch of other European countries. So yeah, we have about 250 maybe full-time employees. The plurality of our team members around the world are scientists. Our focus is scientific ecosystem building. Our sort of global battle cry is that governments should be funding science and scaling in alternative proteins. And as I mentioned earlier, all of the governments where we operate 7 years ago were funding not at all. And now all of them are funding and supporting enthusiastically. We think government support is how our goal is to build a maximally robust scientific ecosystem. Government funding is how you build a maximally robust scientific ecosystem. And we've been really gratified. There's a charity evaluator called Giving Green. It was founded by a guy named Dan Stein, who got his PhD in economics at the London School of Economics. For the last 15 years, he has been doing global development analysis for the World Bank, and then for something called ID Insight, which does global development analysis for the World Bank, for major foundations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as governments. And they basically analyze interventions, the cost benefit value of interventions to alleviate hunger and malnutrition and make progress on global health endeavors. And he realized maybe 5 years ago that a lot of money was going into climate change mitigation, but nobody was analyzing how effective that money was being spent. So he took his LSE training and his global development training, brought it to bear on climate change mitigation to figure out what are the charities that are having the highest impact and have the best prospects of high impact success in mitigating climate emissions. And for the last 4 years, for all 4 years that we've been evaluated, GFI has been selected as one of the top 5 or 6. This year it's 5 charities for mitigating climate emissions. And GFI is 100% funded by philanthropy. Our largest funders are the Bezos Earth Fund and Coefficient Giving, which used to be called Open Philanthropy. But we have lots of sustaining donors who are giving us, $5 a month or $15, $20 a year, et cetera. And we're very enthusiastic about that. And we think that GFI is a really good philanthropic opportunity if you care about global health, if you care about hunger and malnutrition, if you care about the environment, including climate change, if you care about animal protection. The Charity Navigator, which is a big US charity evaluator, they have us as one of the top 5 charities for animal protection, which we're gratified by. And I will say, when I started working on it, our sort of founding date is February 1st, 2016. We really had no idea whether anybody would be enthusiastic about our theory of change. So we've been super gratified by how many people are excited about what it is that we're doing and how it is that we're doing it. From the very beginning, we've been focused on metrics. We've been focused on setting goals, measuring our impact against our goals, being willing to change our activities on the basis of whether they are successful or not, et cetera. We really do take a focus on maximum impact super, super seriously.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question that you've just answered. That when you started GFI, did you ever imagine it would get as big as it is today?
Yeah, I mean, the goal for GFI is not to be maximally large. So, I mean,
Or it's
there are
impactful, I suppose, is the
yeah,
better way of describing it.
yeah. I'm incredibly gratified by the degree to which GFI has integrated with the global scientific communities across things like biotechnology, tissue engineering, plant biology, et cetera. I'm also super gratified by our relationships with, in the UK, the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Center, part of UCRI, in the US, the National Science Foundation, the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, and sort of the opposite numbers for those agencies everywhere we operate, as well as our role um, in working with the UN Environment Program on the report that I mentioned, working with Climate Works Foundation on a couple of reports that they have put out, and so on. All of that is super gratifying. On the other hand, um, there really should, the global health community, the hunger and malnutrition community, the folks who care about conservation, everything from deforestation to climate change, et cetera. Alternative proteins should be right there alongside energy transition, if you're talking about climate change, um, drug development, if you're talking about antimicrobial resistance, um, feeding programs, if you're talking about hunger and malnutrition, alternative proteins. Like in the last 3 or 4 years, we've really gotten key people, experts, and influential institutions to embrace the necessity of the theory of change. Um, but it is nevertheless not yet at the level that it should be. I'm hoping that the book will play some role in elevating alternative proteins to sort of their rightful place
Yeah.
as an intervention for mitigating hunger and malnutrition, the environmental benefits, the global health benefits. And just to underline again, the way that happens is recognition by governments of the economic opportunity and the food security, food systems resilience imperatives that come with shifting in this direction. We've been making meat in the same way for 12,000 years. We have been growing crops to feed them to animals so that we can eat animals for 12,000 years. In the book, I talk about this as the new agricultural revolution. It is an inefficient, antiquated, environmentally unsustainable, bad for global health, and really bad in a world with, the latest numbers from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, 3 billion people can't afford a healthy and nutritious diet. Um, Something like 800 million people are starving. Like, what's a food system supposed to do? It's supposed to feed everybody. This system is
Mhm.
not doing that. Um, and the inefficiency comes, the environmental harm and the hunger and malnutrition harm come from the vast quantities of land, 80% of agricultural land, that is devoted to either grazing animals or growing food for animals in this shockingly inefficient system that has us growing 9 calories of crops for 1 calorie of chicken, and even more inefficient systems for producing farmed fish and pork and lamb and beef and other products. So most people listening or watching are going to be concerned about food waste. We should be concerned about food waste. Something like 30% of all food produced is wasted. But just the physiology of the chicken, you're throwing away 8 calories for every one that you produce. So, if for food waste, you're throwing away 3 for every 10, with chicken, you're throwing away 80 for every 10 that you produce, just inherent in the physiology of animal product production, as well as all the drugs that are required, as well as the skyrocketing pandemic risk, et cetera. It really is time to shift in this
Yes.
direction.
Yes, there is I mean, there's quite a famous quote by Churchill, isn't there, that kind of talks about, kind of growing chickens in order to only use a small part of it for food. And that there will come a time when that changes. I just wanted to ask you one more question before I let you go. I mean, it's quite a big question to end on, I'm afraid, but I'm kind of curious. Um, in regard to kind of regenerative agriculture and biotech knowledge in regard to kind of fertilizers and pesticides. Is this something that the GFI has an opinion on, or is it something that you kind of steer clear of?
Yeah, I mean, chapter 2 of the book, I dive into regenerative agriculture. Um, all of the analysis indicates that regenerative agriculture, where farm animals are concerned, is going to require more land than conventional agriculture. The World Resources Institute has done multiple analyses of this question. There were scientists from half a dozen universities in like 4 countries, I think, that looked into all of the science on regenerative agriculture. The folks at Project Drawdown, John Foley and his team, which are probably the most reputable sort of disinterested analysts of climate benefits of literally every technology. And all of this analysis indicates that emissions go up and land use needs go up with regenerative agriculture. But regenerative agriculture has huge benefits for soil health, for water quality, for farmer livelihoods. It can be done in a way that has biodiversity benefits. So if the only thing you care about is how much land and how much emissions, then regenerative agriculture is not the right choice. But food systems are responsible for lots more than those two things, where regenerative agriculture has significant benefits. So what I argue in the book is that alternative proteins are a complement to the benefits of regenerative agriculture because they require so much less land. Plant-based chicken requires about a sixth of the land. Cultivated chicken requires about a fourth of the land of conventional chicken in both cases. Plant-based and cultivated beef requires about a 20th the land. So the folks at Green Alliance in the UK did some modeling across 10 European countries. And among their other findings, what they found was if there were a two-thirds shift towards alternative proteins, you could 4x, 400% the amount of regenerative agriculture that was being used, even as you got to food self-sufficiency across those 10 countries. So we're enthusiastic about regenerative agriculture, and we think alternative proteins can help to free up the land that's going to be necessary if we're shifting in that direction.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the program, Bruce. So your book is going to be out early February, and
February 3rd.
February 3rd, and it's available on Amazon and all good booksellers, I expect.
We have a website which is just meatbook.org, so MEAT book.org, and
Okay.
you can click on purchase and find distributors.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I hope it does very well. I expect it will. And thank you for coming on, Bruce. It's been wonderful to meet you and to talk to you. And I look forward to meeting you in Chicago in February.
Thank you so much for all of your work, Alex. It's really exciting and incredibly valuable, and I'm honored to be on your podcast and looking forward to Chicago.
Thank you very much.